Okay, everyone, it is now 12 o'clock p.m., so we will be starting right now. So first of all, hello and welcome to our Creative Space case study webinar, and it's the first one that we're doing for 2020. My name is Amy Poole, and I'm the Program Manager for ArtsBuild Ontario. We are pleased to introduce our presenter, Fred Fuchs, the Chair of the Westdale Cinema Group's Board of Directors. This webinar is the 8th out of 10 webinars in the Creative Space case study webinar series, highlighting one of the Creative Space capital projects from our Creative Space case study series. Before we get started, we just need to review a few housekeeping items. First of all, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for this webinar, but you can use your speakers or headphones to listen in. You can adjust the sound by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of the meeting. So as a quick test, could everyone please type in a quick yes or no in the chat box if they can hear me clearly? Perfect, awesome, thank you so much. We will be recording this session and it will also be emailed to you along with the PowerPoint presentation following the webinar, so please keep an eye out in your inbox for that. We will also be emailing out a quick survey following the session. We ask that you please complete the survey so that we can continue to develop programs that respond to the current needs of creative spaces. Finally, we will have roughly about 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the presentation to answer any questions you may have. Please use the chat box on the bottom right to type in your questions, and we will get to as many as possible within our time span. If you are new to this Creative Space case study series or have not heard of us before, ArtsBuild Ontario is a nonprofit arts service organization which offers programs and learning opportunities related to the building, managing, and financing of sustainable creative spaces across Ontario. This Creative Space case study series covers the creative space projects of 19 organizations across Ontario. Capital projects range from major and minor renovations to new builds entirely. 9 case studies from organizations such as the Tet Centre in Kingston, the Dundas Museum and Archives in Dundas, the Lighthouse Festival Theatre in Port Dover, and more are readily accessible on ArtsBuild Ontario's website in both English and French. You can access these case studies at the link shown at the bottom of the slide. The remaining 10 case studies will be published on this webpage very soon. And we will also be publishing a complete best practices summary report in the coming weeks on the same webpage. So please be sure to check back on our website very soon. To support the Creative Space case study series, this webinar includes 10 webinars that highlight various Creative Space capital projects from our list of 19 Creative Space projects. Each webinar is led by arts leaders who were involved in many or all aspects of their respective capital project. So previous webinars we've done featured the Ottawa Art Gallery, Idea Exchange, the Dundas Museum and Archives, Carousel Players, and many more. Today's webinar will elaborate on the story of how a new nonprofit charitable organization was able to raise $4.5 million to save the Westdale Theatre from being torn down, and then how the organization was successful in a heritage restoration. In this webinar, Fred Fuchs will discuss the process of ongoing fundraising attempts, as well as programming challenges that were overcome. I would also like to mention that this webinar will run from 12 o'clock p.m. to 1 o'clock p.m., so we will have about an hour together. Following introductions, I will hand it over to our presenter, and again, after the presentation, there will be about 10 minutes for questions, discussion, and our wrap-up. With that, I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Fred Fuchs, Chair of the Westdale Cinema Board of Directors. Fred Fuchs has been involved in the film and television industry as an independent producer, Hollywood film executive, Canadian broadcaster, and consultant for 40 years. First in Los Angeles, then San Francisco, and next Toronto, he now lives in Dundas, Ontario. His most recent projects include the feature films The Virtuoso, which features Anthony Hopkins, Anson Mount, and Abby Cornish, Little Italy, featuring Emma Roberts, Hayden Christensen, and Danny Aiello, Milton's Secret, featuring Donald Sutherland, Michelle Rodriguez, and Monkey Beach, featuring Grace Dove and Adam Beach. Fred has worked on award-winning television series like Fairy Tale Theater for Showtime and Vietnam War Stories for HBO. Fred has then segued into the feature film industry, producing Tucker, The Man in His Dream, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and executively produced by George Lucas. After moving to Toronto, Fred was Executive Director of Arts and Entertainment at the CBC, Canada's public broadcaster, commissioning and supervising production of entertainment content, which included the shows The Tudors, Little Mosque on the Prairie, and Heartland. We are very pleased to have him provide his insights and expertise for the webinar today. And with that, I would like to turn the
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me and the sound is okay. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you at all today because this is a project that's been a great passion of mine for quite a long time. As Amy, thank you, Amy, for the introduction. As you can tell, I've been in this arts and entertainment business for quite a while, and fortunately, am now semi-retired and live out in Dundas, which is right part of Hamilton, Ontario, and moved out here about 5 years ago, and just almost by accident wandered into this old Westdale theater, not knowing it was there, and it's 5 minutes from my house, and sort of had this vision of what it could become, and fortunately found a lot of wonderful collaborators in Hamilton, including the city, who supported this idea and who made it possible to get where we are. So anyhow, on this first slide, you'll see a picture of the theater as it first existed. When it was built in 1934, it was actually built for sound. It was not a vaudeville theater that was, that was converted. At the time, around this time, there were 32 neighborhood theaters like this in Hamilton, and now there were 2 or 3, and this one was sort of scheduled to be torn down. I don't know if you guys know Hamilton or Westdale Village, but it was a planned community. It was built around the time McMaster University was built. We're a 5-minute walk from McMaster. And it was a centered plan. And of course, they put a movie theater in the middle because 60% of Canadians went once a week. It was in terrible condition. No one had done anything for it. But at the same time that, I see, people are having trouble hearing me. Amy, do you have a recommendation of what to do now, or are we okay?
Yes, I would recommend if there is any issue with hearing the audio, I would recommend checking your speakers, and if not, then closing and just reopening the program, because I know that it is other people can hear, myself included, can hear Fred.
Okay, so I'll just continue. So anyhow, this theater had been in continuous operation for 82 years, which was wonderful because it still existed, even though it was in terrible condition and the owner had done nothing to sustain it. And I tried to reach him, other people tried to reach him, but then he died, and the theater was placed on for sale on December 27th, 2016. Do I move the slides, Amy, or do you? Okay, please move. Next slide. So this is what we'll be covering, the inspiration and vision for the theater, how we managed to purchase it, how we managed to restore it, and then how we managed to, get it opened. And we've now been open for 1 year, so we've had a first year of operation complete. Next slide. So the vision, and again, just as a preface, I was involved in a similar project when I lived in San Rafael, California, in the San Francisco area, where there was also an old theater that was falling apart in a bad part of town. A group of filmmakers got together. We managed to buy the theater, start a nonprofit. It became the home of the Mill Valley Film Festival. That was about 18 years ago, still going strong. So I'd seen this happen before. And I've also done quite a bit of research about the independent film business. Of course, that's the business I'm in. And what's happening with independent cinemas, not just in Canada, but also in the US. And recognize that there's been quite a kind of renaissance of these independent film centers, that people are rebelling against the cineplexes, etc. They also don't want to just sit home and watch Netflix all the time. And these kinds of cultural hubs, community centers, independent cinemas are blossoming, throughout North America, so that the potential for this existed. So the vision, the Westdale Theater will be a community-based cinematic and cultural hub for Westdale Village, the city of Hamilton, and the surrounding region. The mission, the Westdale Theater is Hamilton's premier independent cinema and arts venue, will screen art and independent films, and provide an intimate, heritage-designated cultural space for performers and events. Part of the reason that the timing of this was good was because Hamilton itself is going through a bit of a cultural renaissance. As you may know, this was sort of a steel town, industry town. It's changing quite a bit. There's quite a bit of activity around McMaster and health sciences and engineering and technology. It's affordable, so there's been a diaspora from the top Toronto of musicians and artists who can no longer afford there. And there's quite a bit of support from the city for these types of art programming and cultural events. And so when I started to float this idea around a few neighbors and people I knew, I got quite a bit of support right from the beginning, and faith that this was possible and worth trying. Next slide. So the plan was relatively simple. Let's see if we could close a deal to purchase, raise the money to close, buy the purchase. Obtaining charitable status was obviously a critical part of this in order for our ability to raise the money to do the restoration. We wanted to do a state-of-the-art restoration. We also wanted it to be a heritage restoration and retain all the features of the Art Deco theater. You know, commercial operation would probably have cut the theater in two to have two screens, but we didn't want to do that because, of course, we wanted to use for events and everything else. So we did apply, we received heritage designation, and then we managed to, and this was always the goal, to open the theater in less than 2 years from the time we closed on the purchase. And in order to do this plan, it really took a lot of faith and a lot of hope. We had to move very quickly. By mid-January of 2018, an offer had been made on the building by a developer, and we had to counter that offer by that afternoon. Fortunately, we had gone ahead and registered a nonprofit company, and we put up a deposit, myself and two of my friends, with actually no money to actually close the deal. We just went ahead and negotiated a deal with the broker and got an agreement. I guess our theory was we would get out of the deal on the inspection if we couldn't raise any money. It was really nip and tuck to raise the money, but we managed to do it the day before closing. We had to push closing by a month, but the seller agreed. Next slide. So this is how we did finance the purchase. It was $1,750,000 was the purchase price. We decided we should raise a $2 million mortgage, so we had $250 to cover our overhead operation, because of course during the restoration there would be no revenue. So we created what we called a founder's mortgage. We received $1 million from the Hamilton Community Foundation. They're a very wealthy, community foundation who decided to take a portion of their money and invest in what they called social impact lending. So it was not a grant, it was a mortgage, but it was at 4% per year for 7 years with no principal payments. So we were very lucky. We applied for it. We received that in that month or two we had to raise the money. And then we also received $1 million from private founders. There were 5 or 6 in the group who all gave us a couple $100,000 based on the same principle of 4 years of interest, no principal payments. And then the founders also agreed to donate back their interest payments for the first 2 years in order to help us get up and operating. So we managed to close the purchase by June 1st, but we did have this $2 million mortgage. And of course, now we have to service that mortgage, but it was the only way we could finance the purchase. Obviously, we weren't going to get money from any kind of private funder, bank, and there was no way we could apply for any grants or do anything fast enough in that 2-month period to actually come up with the money to do the purchase. And of course, owning the theater was a critical part of the whole model because many arts organizations don't own their own buildings, but by owning our own building, it gave us a lot of financial clout as we went into the restoration process as well. Next slide. So the restoration. First, I'll show you a couple of pictures of the old theater. It was, again, not a movie palace. It was a neighborhood theater, but it was quite large. It had about 600 seats, beautiful curtain, etc. And it was really, very successful and the hub of Westdale Village. Next slide. You can see it wasn't ornate, but there was a lot of Art Deco features, and we've retained almost all of those Art Deco features. And that's something that is extremely appealing to our audience. They come in here, they remembered the old theater, they're thrilled to see that we kept it in the same style and in the same aesthetic as what they were used to, except now, of course, it has working bathrooms and the seats aren't broken. And in fact, at the time we bought it, they were showing DVDs. They didn't even have a film projector or a DCP projector. So they're very excited to see it work that way. Next, please. This was the lobby. We managed to save the terracotta floor. Of course, in those days, Concessions was a water fountain. I guess people brought their own snacks. I'm not really sure. But now you'll see pictures later. We obviously have a full concession and we're licensed, etc. Next slide. And this is what the exterior looked like. This was probably 1950 or so. And if you can note this beautiful brick facade with the comedy and tragedy masks, all of that had been covered up. There was a giant neon sign that covered this entire facade. This no longer existed when we purchased it. And we actually had no idea what would be behind the neon sign. We knew from pictures what was going to be there. And we were very happy to find that this was all intact. And you'll see a picture later. And not only that, but it was actually in pretty good condition because it had been covered up by a neon sign for 50 years. Next slide. So, restoration process. So once again, rather than wait to raise the money for the restoration, we just started doing it. We managed to find a local architect who specialized in heritage restoration, who was also one of our founders, so he charged us a very discounted rate. And then even more fortunate, we found a retired theater designer who was the head designer for Lowe's theaters, and he agreed to do all his work pro bono. So that must have saved us $30,000, $40,000 in design fees. And it was his attention to all of the specialized sort of Art Deco features and custom carpet, and you'll see the other pictures. But having those two people in place was sort of essential right from the beginning in order to start doing the plans. We were able to get the original architectural plans from the Ontario Archives, which is always very helpful when you're about to do a major restoration, so you can see, exactly what was where and just everything from electrical and all of that. The planning and getting the permits, of course, is a long, complicated process. Fortunately, the city of Hamilton, besides giving us some funding for restoration, really helped us streamline the activity. Both the councillor from our ward, the mayor himself, I brought and got the city involved very early on in the process, brought them down to the theater, showed them what was going on, met with them, and they were able to streamline a process of permits that might take 6-8 months, and we had them in about 2 months. And then, of course, once we had the plans, the local contractor, and then creating the budget was very complicated because, of course, as you know, once you start to tear up an old building, God knows what you're going to find, but we had to, of course, have a budget. Everybody we used were local vendors, for the HVAC and plumbing and electric. We also had many volunteers. The volunteers came in and took out all the seats, the old seats. We got very good rates from these local vendors because they all really believed in what we were doing. None of them, did it for free, but it was, we managed to keep the budget in reasonable shape. And actually, we ultimately came in on budget and on schedule, which is almost impossible to do. Again, I mentioned heritage designation was very important, not just because we got money from the Heritage Fund of the City of Hamilton, but also once donors and everyone understood that we had heritage designation, they knew therefore that this theater would always exist now. It's not that, our group could fail and then 5 years from now it'll be torn down. It will always be a theater because it now has heritage designation. In fact, when we went to the heritage meeting, they told us we were the first owners of a public building, or this type of building in Hamilton that ever supported heritage designation. As you know, most people resist heritage designation because of the limitations on what you can do. But for us, it really made an enormous impression. And then keeping to the schedule took just, we were a small board. We had no employees, but we basically were the operational team that drove the entire process. Next slide, please. So this is how we financed the restoration. It was $2.6 million. So the whole project was a $4.6 million. First, we went to our Ward 1 in Hamilton, which had a participatory budget, which meant that they had $1.5 million each year that they could designate themselves as to where that money would go. And the choices are based on a ballot that actually gets distributed among Ward 1. The councilor put us on the ballot. We were the #1 vote getter by far. This is a well-loved theater. The residents all wanted it restored. We received $225,000 grant. Future Fund, another Hamilton City Fund, gave us $250,000. The Heritage Fund I mentioned already, $125,000. And then we got a Trillium Capital Grant for $150,000. The big disaster for us is we were in line for a Cultural Spaces Grant. That's a federal program. And it was going to be for $850,000. And it really looked very positive, and we were right down to the final decision. And then, unfortunately, they gave $1.5 million to something called the Ancaster Arts Center in Hamilton, which to this date has not even broken ground yet. Much longer story, but as you know, there's a lot of political influence that goes on to how some of these provincial and federal grants get done. Then from private donors, we raised $950,000. A lot of that was naming rights. We sold the naming rights to the auditorium for $350,000, the naming rights to the lounge for $100,000, the naming rights to the lobby, the naming rights to the projection room. We sold naming rights to every part of the building we could. And then we also did a crowdfunding campaign, which got quite successful. A lot of little $25, $50 donations, but we also sold the naming rights to the seats. And it was very important. So each seat has a plaque on it. And we wanted to make it very accessible. So what we did was all the seats on the side were $250. The ones in the front and the back were only $500, and then all the premium seats were $1,000. So that made everyone feel they could participate. We sold out the seats before we were done with construction. And then, unfortunately, because of the failure with the federal fund, we had to take additional loans. And both from the Hamilton Community Foundation and from a private donor, we had to borrow another $750,000. So unfortunately, as an ongoing organization, we now have this enormous debt, $2,750,000. We have 7 years to pay it back, but we have to service that interest every year, and it's very, very difficult. But we made a choice. We wanted to be open. We didn't want to stop. We wanted to reopen in less than 2 years. We didn't wait till we had the money raised. We just kept moving. There were certainly one or two points where we actually thought we were going to have to shut down construction because we had run out of cash. We would scramble around, figure out a way to keep going, borrow some more money. And as I said, we closed on June 1st of 2017, and we opened the theater on February 14th, 2019, less than 2 years. Next slide. This is just an example of how we sold seats, where we had seat dedication certificates so people could buy them for their parents as a Christmas present. You know, we used all the different capital raising tricks we could. Next slide. This was our big opening. We showed Casablanca. We had, you know, it was a premiere. It was a $100 ticket. Sold out 3 months before we actually even had the event, and whether we even knew we could open on Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is now, you know, 1 year has passed. We had another big Valentine's Day activity. Again, part of the vision for this first year was that 80% of the activity would be what I call commercial activity. Showing films, you know, selling tickets, the concession revenue. We also rent the theater to other commercial, you know, promoters for music events, or we'll rent it to, you know, someone for an AGM. We'll rent it for a wedding. We rent it as just a community venue for profit and for rental profits. But then 20% of the activity at the theater, or 70 days, is for charitable activity. So that's when we work with other nonprofit groups, be it film festivals, be it fundraisers for other, you know, other organizations, or we have talk series. We have, you know, we work with McMaster in different partnerships. We do, you know, we make it available for town hall meetings. We'll have free events like a free Academy Award party, or when the Raptors were in the playoffs, you know, we had the basketball games on for free. And our big challenge was actually staffing it, because none of us had actually run a movie theater before, so we didn't actually know what we wanted to have or need as a staff, and we didn't have lots of money. We tried doing a model of hiring an executive director who would sort of be responsible for both sort of the commercial and the charitable activity. It did not work well. It was sort of too much of a job. We then decided to split it up. We have what we call an operations manager or general manager who focuses on all the commercial activity. And then the only other full-time employee we have is a director of marketing and development. Because what we soon discovered, of course, is that the marketing is essential to everything. And then he also works on the charitable side, doing development. So we actually have two budgets. We have a budget for all of our commercial activity, all the revenue, expenses. We have a budget for our charitable activity in terms of revenue and expenses. Of course, we didn't qualify for grants the first year of operation because we were too new, and the grant money obviously couldn't come in yet. But already we have been receiving several different grants now for that will be, you know, that, and the programs will be executed in this year. Next slide. So here's the finished theater. As you can see, we did do a new marquee, trying to capture very much the style of the, you know, of the Westdale green and the Art Deco. Believe it or not, that entire top part, the brick wall, had to come down. It was brought down to nothing, had to be completely rebuilt and reinforced. It turned out the neon sign was the only thing that was holding it up anymore. But so that was a big expense, but we felt critical. And of course, you can see the masks are still in great shape, but now that'll stand for a long time to come. Obviously, we didn't do the old-fashioned marquee where someone goes up with a ladder to change the letters. We have a digital marquee that we can program all sorts of different ways with all of our different films and events. Next slide. So this is what it looks like inside. The big change, of course, is we shrunk it from 600 seats to 340 seats. We recognized we wanted to make a more intimate space. We obviously needed additional legroom. We created handicapped seating in the back. And most importantly, we built a stage. There was no stage. This was, again, built for cinema. So it's quite a substantial stage, as you can see in the front. So that allows us to do music concerts and panels and all sorts of other events. The equipment is all state of the art. It's a digital Christie 2K projector. We show DCPs. We can also show PowerPoints and DVDs and everything else. You can see there's a separate 7.1 surround sound, and then a separate PA sound system for music events, lighting grid. There's another lighting pole in the back. Not obviously elaborate lighting, but enough for this type of facility. But again, it was really getting to the intimacy level of the 340, which also helped with other infrastructure challenges in terms of bathrooms, in terms of parking, which is always a challenge. There may be 10 events a year that sell out, and it would have been nice to have had more seats. But for the most part, it was more important for us to create a wonderful experience for the audience where they came and enjoyed them and had room to get by each other and had cup holders and wide aisles and all those kinds of things. We transformed all the colors, hopefully getting close to what some of the original colors looked like. But as you can see, kept as many of the deco features with the coving and even with, well, you can't see the lights, but we tried to keep every feature we could as similar to the original design. Next slide. There's the lobby. As you can see, Concession is a very big part of the theater business. We also got a license, so we can sell beer and wine. You can see the monitors behind the counter give us an opportunity to not just show the cost of the concessions, but we can show a trailer or a clip or a poster. And unfortunately, you're not seeing the other side wall where all of our posters are. But if you see the mirrors and the lighting and the cove, everything again reflecting the deco style. And of course, that is the original floor from 1934. Next slide. So this is the lounge inside after the lobby. Straight across is the theater itself. They are open to each other. But just another example of how we use our space. So we now have a community art lounge. So every couple of months, we have a different show. We feature local artists and give them a chance to get some recognition and publicity. We have an opening night where we show an art film and a free event where we bring in, and invite all the artists to come and other people from the arts community. And we show some, interesting film and have a speaker, because Dundas, or this area, obviously has a lot of artists and a lot of interest in art. And as you know, art galleries are suffering and there are very few of them anymore and they're closing. Next slide. This may be hard to read, but this was obviously, a critical part of what we were doing during the restoration process, was determining our strategic framework. You'll see the mission statement, you'll see the vision statement, and then you'll see we kind of defined our goals in 4 areas: as a cinema, as a cultural hub, a cultural activity, a business hub, etc. And you see we established our goals, we established our strategies. Obviously, some of that has evolved over the year or so, but most of them are still pretty much guidelines for everything we do. This was very critical, not just as we brought on some additional board members, but also when we went to funders and we write grants and we want to speak to the community. Having this very well captured and defined. And we did this, as I said, pretty early on while we were still in the restoration process. It was very, very critical for us. And, you can, I don't know if this is something you're going to be able to save and look at more, but certainly, happy to answer any questions you have about strategies or goals. Again, this concept of a third space, which I assume most of you have heard of, that This is sort of a sociological phenomenon. We have our workspace, we have our home space. Everybody needs a third space. It used to be the church or maybe the country club or the village pub. We think of the Westdale as that third space. The people, the ushers, the concession people know your name. You run into your neighbors here. We provide that kind of welcoming third space. And people seem to really, really crave that these days and don't want to just stay home and watch Netflix all the time. Next slide. So some of the highlights, of course, were our partnerships with the Art Gallery of Hamilton Film Festival. So not only do we host their film festival in November, which they've been doing for many, many years, but we actually have once a month Art Gallery of Hamilton film screenings at the Westdale. So we were able to provide them a continuity where they can do this all year long, not just once a year. And for us, it was a great way of diversifying the programming because a lot of the independent films we show are going to be sort of the more commercial ones like Parasite and Little Women and Marriage Story and The Irishman. But the art gallery will show a French film or they'll show a true art film that might not be programmable for us in a commercial way. But now we actually have once a month that type of art film as well. We made a similar deal with the Hamilton Film Festival. Again, once a year they come in for 3 or 4 days, host a film festival, and then once a month they have a series they call Be in the Room. And the Hamilton Film Festival is a different focus because their focus is all around local filmmakers and Canadian filmmakers and showcasing films that maybe don't even have distribution or emerging filmmakers. And this has also worked very well because we have locals, the filmmakers come and talk about their films. This month it's an Indigenous film program made up of a number of different Indigenous filmmakers, and they'll be here to speak about their experiences and their films and how they funded their films, etc. We have a local fringe festival, of course, so they came and took over the theater for a week in July, and we're able to do something much more elaborate in a much better venue than they typically work at. The Community Art Lounge, the free shows, the Creative Soul Talk series, you'll see that in a moment. Talk as a category has been very successful for us. We have a retired community, a lot of McMaster professors. We run these in the afternoon. We also made a deal. A friend of mine runs Hot Docs in Toronto. They have a very successful talk series called Curious Minds. So we now present Hot Docs Curious Minds at the Westdale in Hamilton. And we work with them to find, and we use many of their best speakers. These are 6-part, 2-hour sessions that are, have a curriculum and not film. These are on all different types of subjects. And with their branding and working together, we've turned that into a good series. And then, of course, something we didn't expect, but Netflix and the other streamers, as you know, or maybe you don't know, Cineplex Odeon is not taking their films because of the short window before these things come up again. So we were able to get The Irishman. We were the highest grossing indie cinema in Ontario. Many of their other films, The Two Popes, Marriage Story, etc. Next slide. This was an example of a talk series, Creative Soul. A local Hamilton person, Ian Thomas, a fairly well-known musician, and he would bring a guest each month. And instead of being a performance show, it was really a talk show about the creative process, blah, blah, blah. We had Murray McLaughlin one month, Dan Hill, Sylvia Tyson, very successful. Over 200 people came for each one of these, and we were able to charge a much higher ticket. And again, just an example of how we tried to expand on how we've done, in terms of just being more than a cinema. Next slide. So moving forward, I can see already a question about financial success in our first year. And I did not include a slide to actually get into a lot of detail around that. But it was obviously a challenging year because we were building an audience for the first time. We had to figure out what programming worked for our audience. We found out 9 o'clock shows were not terribly successful showing traditional art house movies. So we had to, but we could get a 9 o'clock audience for movies like Parasite. We had to figure out how to program to a younger demographic, master students. But then we also found we could do 4 o'clock matinees, and we could get a real audience at 4 o'clock for Little Women and movies that appeal to an older audience. We obviously had a very serious problem in terms of continuing to get donations. So we were very successful in terms of our memberships. We charge a $10 membership fee. You get a discounted price on your ticket. We have over 1,200 members, which is amazing in one year. We were very successful in getting people's emails. We have over 6,000 emails in our database, which helps us, of course, with all of our marketing. Most of our marketing had to be done on social media. We didn't have a big marketing budget, but we're finding that over time that's become successful. We had a lot of problems with our website at first. We obviously do sell tickets on the website as well and try to use that as a great hub for marketing everything. But, we opened very quickly. The websites had to go through a lot of, but the biggest problem was getting donors. We found that a lot of our private donors had sort of donor fatigue after doing all the capital fundraising for us. Our sort of fundraising committee all kind of said, enough, we're done. And we're finding it much harder to find private donors. The only thing that seems to be working is sponsorships, where we can sometimes find a sponsor for a particular event, be it a film festival or the Creative Soul talk series, but we're really suffering from a lack of donors and struggling with what to do about that because obviously, as most arts organizations often run at maybe 65% commercial, 35% from donations and grants. Our model was able to work at 80% commercial activity and only 20% in donations and grants. And we were not able to achieve that 20%. Our top line revenue for the year is probably around $700,000, which isn't bad, but we lost money for the year. We probably lost around $75,000 for the year. Fortunately, we were able to cover that from the fact that we brought in our restoration about $100,000 under budget because we finished quickly and on time. And so we were using the excess money from that to help fund our negative cash flow for the first year. But now in the second year, cash flow is extremely tight. We're hoping not to have to borrow any additional money. We do have a line of credit with our bank. We do have an asset, which is the building, of course, which is not fully mortgaged. But it's very difficult. And unless we achieve that 20%, in grants and donations, I'm not sure how we will. Well, we'll find solutions. The commercial activity side is going well. We've added other events. We now have a comedy night every night, once a month, and that's done well. We had a fundraiser for our first anniversary, and that was sold out, and we raised money. We've already received 3 grants for this year. But as you know, often the grants, the program costs of operating the grant are almost as much as the grant itself. So a lot of that doesn't stick with you. The big grant opportunity here is in Hamilton is called the City Enrichment Grant, which we've applied for and most of the big arts organizations get. And that is a infrastructure grant. It goes for operating costs. And we won't hear about that till May, but obviously really counting on that. Next slide. Questions. So yeah, we don't have too much time, but obviously I'm here and would be able to answer any questions. Just quickly, yes, we do sell all of our tickets at the theater website. If you can't tell that, that's not good. And yes, we can do either event general admission or we can do reserve seats. We have both options. For the events, we almost always do reserve seats. For the movies, we more or less do general admission. I'm not sure how we want to handle the questions, Amy.
Hi, Fred. Yeah, no problem. So first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very detailed and had a lot of great information to give. So what I think I'll do is I will relay the questions to you, and then we can kind of take it from there. So this was an earlier question that we had from Janice Barlow, who had asked what the seating capacity was for the Westdale. I believe that that was mentioned, but if you could clarify.
340 plus handicap.
Great, thank you so much. And then we have a question from Alan Sampson. He says, wondering if you are planning on creating a parking space at the Westdale because.
No, yes, you're absolutely right. It's limited, and we really have no solution for parking spaces. We have had sold out events, and people seem to park and they come, or people are starting to get a little smarter and they use Uber or a taxi, or people walk. Um, this was a big question for us, and I think our philosophy around it was that we're here for another 50 years. We'd like to believe that, 5, 10 years from now, perhaps transportation will be different. There was talk of an LRT in Hamilton that was going to be a stop a block away, and that would have been great, but that seems to have been canceled. But, so short term, yes, parking problems. I personally don't believe 10 years from now, car ownership and use will be the same as it is today, but who knows? So all we can do is, people know parking can be challenging, but they do find parking and they do come.
Great, thank you very much. We also have a question from Becky Scott, who says, did you ever consider a social enterprise model, for profit, but with a cultural/social mission, rather than not for profit considering grant?
Yes. So, Becky, I am very familiar with the social enterprise model. And the social enterprise model is, in retrospect, probably, in a sense, what we are wound up doing, even though from an organization and structural perspective, it probably would have taken more time to plan and to effectively be able to, institute it and educate people and promote it. But in principle, it's sort of what we're doing because we have a commercial operation and we have a charitable operation. And I believe social enterprises are the future. For us, getting charitable status was critical. We would never have gotten any of these donations without, being able to write tax receipts. And then, of course, for some grants, charitable status is a huge plus. I do understand you can have a charitable status part of your social enterprise, but if I had to do it again today, I might have tried to do it in that social enterprise structure. We were just moving so fast and really, sort of took what seemed like the most familiar route.
Thank you very much. Just as a quick question for the chat, are people able to hear me properly? Just type a quick yes or no. I know that we'll just get to fixing any issues on that end, but yes, good. Okay, awesome. So we also have a question, excuse me, from Alan Sampson again. He says he's curious to know how you've done financially in the first 2-ish years of your operation. So are you meeting revenue targets, staying within budget? Maybe you could elaborate more on that since I believe.
I saw that question, and again, I would say that from a commercial revenue perspective, we are meeting our targets. We were quite realistic in terms of our occupancy rates. Again, the film business is a good business in a way because, as you may know, you actually collect revenue first, and then you pay a percentage for the royalty for the distribution rights, usually about 35 to 40%. So you don't have any inventory issues, you don't have cash flow issues related to film rentals, And if your film rentals go way down, well, then your expenses go way down because you don't pay as much, of a distribution fee. But we really did manage to meet almost all of our commercial expectations. We had some trouble around our concession revenue. We had hoped to get some sponsorship on our beer and wine that never quite panned out. So some of our costs on the concession side were higher. Obviously, you're always looking at margins on concession because that's really, the lifeblood of a theater. But as I said, what really hurt us from a revenue projection side was our inability to get further donations or any grants in our first year. We had projected, I believe, it was around $100,000 in donation, in donations, and after raising all this money for capital and $1 million and this and that, $100,000 seemed like a pretty realistic projection for a whole year in private donations, especially the fact that we could write tax receipts. And I think we wound up at 25,000. So almost all of our revenue loss, from a cash flow perspective, was related to sort of the charitable side of our projections, not to our commercial operation. The commercial operation really did as we expected.
Great, thank you very much. Alan Sampson also asked who provides ticketing services, and he was checking the theater website.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't really understand what happened, Alan, because we use a ticketing service called Veezy. It's from the States. It's very sophisticated ticketing service. It allows us immediate online ticket sales as well as works in conjunction with our box office in the theater. So we always know when they're talking to each other. It does all of our concession sales. It does our reporting, on the film sales and on the attendance. And it's there on our website, and people buy tickets on the website. We obviously encourage people to buy tickets on their website. It makes it much easier on the night of the show to then have to have people wait online. We have scanners, all that kind of stuff. And our website is being redone. It's not as effective as we'd like it to be. It's not as easy to navigate. We have a much older audience, and of course, we need to make things simple, not sophisticated. Our calendar is critical, but I don't know a better system. I mean, that's not true. There are much more expensive and better systems out there, but we found this to be an effective one and not too pricey, and it works for us for the most part.
Thank you very much.
And we also have. Go ahead. No, I just wanted to say, and we also do reserves. We can do reserve seating, and we can also sell, general admission.
Great, thank you very much. So we probably have time for one more question, and I know that we have lots of other questions, but what I can do is I can take your questions and connect you with Fred so that he can answer you via email after the session. So for the last question we have from Chad, who says, how do you make the building as accessible as possible, all the while still covering operational costs and
Well, that's a big challenge. And when you mean accessible, for me, that's two things. One is pricing, right? So our prices is $12 for general admission. But if you buy a $10 membership for the year, then it's $9. It's $9 for seniors. It's $9 for students. We make it as accessible as we possibly can. We are a charitable organization. We're not trying to, create a return for our shareholders, but on the other hand, we have to service our debt and service, everything else. It's a huge challenge for us. We talk about trying to raise prices, but again, it's also like marketing. We're spending twice the budget on marketing this year than we spent last year, but we really believe we have to do it in order to increase our attendance. And if we can, increase our attendance by twice, we'll have paid off all the extra marketing expenses, and so we're running a business and taking risk and doing, everything we can. We use volunteers whenever possible as our ushers. We don't have volunteers at the concession. Our staff is really 3 people, a director of marketing and development, a general manager, and a bookkeeper who's part-time. Everybody else is just, minimum, college students and staff doing the concessions and volunteers. Handicapped access, we spent a lot of money, but that's all done, so that's available for everybody. But we will not be able to continue if we can't qualify for grants and get donors. In other words, we wouldn't be able to continue with all of our charitable activity. We would have to put more focus on commercial activity, and instead of 80-20, it'll be 90-10. I mean, we do have the flexibility of increasing commercial activity, but that's just not our vision and not what we want to do. And it's a big struggle. We are far from out of the woods, but we do see increased audiences all the time, and we continue to go out and fundraise and look for sponsors and build out our board of directors and hope for the best.
Thank you very much. That's really great, and of course, thank you everyone for all of your questions. I will be sure to, any outstanding questions that I see, I will be sure to email them to Fred and connect you with him so that he can answer you. So now we're just going to go into just a brief little sort of description of different programs that ArtsBuild offers, just to kind of wrap up the session. So one of our core programs that we have is the Creative Spaces Mentoring Network. This is a mentoring program for cultural leaders in Ontario's arts sector, which focuses on strengthening the business and management skills needed to successfully oversee, renew, and develop creative spaces. Arts leaders across Ontario are encouraged to apply as mentees, particularly if they are seeking feedback or guidance on a specific project related to their creative space. Our application deadline for our current 2020 to 21 iteration is Friday, March 13th by 5:00 p.m. So if you are interested, please be sure to get your application in by this date. The Asset Planner for the Arts is another one of our core programs. It's a cloud-based asset management program that tracks the condition of your facility assets, as well as the replacement costs for key building components. Asset Planner for the Arts is a tool that not only provides you with a more detailed outlook on your project in the moment, but it also offers detailed capital forecasts for the future of your project for the next 30 years, with a focus on the next 5 years specifically. For more information on this, please contact our Executive Director, Alex Glass. Space Finder is another one of our programs. It's an online database of spaces developed by Fractured Atlas that allows people to search by genre, discipline, size, location, and more for spaces that they would be interested in renting. ArtsBuild Ontario specifically manages Space Finder in Canada, which includes a total number of 11 instances across Canada. These include 8 regions or cities, as well as 3 provincial listings. It is completely free to list your space with this program, and it could very well boost your rental numbers if you are interested in listing your space. So for more information, please check out spacefinderincanada.ca. And I'd also like to take just a small amount of time to talk about some tools and resources available to you. Our Planet Build It is a tool that supports arts organizations executing capital projects. It is a guideline designed to equip arts organizations to plan and execute these capital projects with a step-by-step approach. Planet Build It is coordinated with ArtsBuild's resource library to offer access to industry standard guidelines and best practices. Of course, if you're interested in getting more out of our Creative Space Case Study webinar series, we will be offering an additional webinar in the coming weeks covering and highlighting a capital project by the Al Green Theatre. This webinar features a capital project for the Al Green Theatre in Toronto, where major improvements were made to the facility to improve accessibility of the venue. Peter Falaber and Angie Stilatano will be speaking on this project on Wednesday, March 25th from 12 o'clock till 1 o'clock. So if you're considering changes to improve the accessibility of your creative space, be sure to check that out. And I will also include a link to register for this webinar in the email that follows this session. We would also like to ask you to please take our evaluation survey for this webinar, as your feedback is extremely valuable to us. It should only take about 5 minutes of your time, and we will be sending out a link following the session. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge our funder, the Department of Canadian Heritage, for funding this case study webinar series. And in closing, thank you very much again to Fred for your detailed presentation. You can check more upcoming webinars on our website at artsbuildontario.ca. If you have any questions, you can of course contact me. Again, my name is Amy Poole, and you can contact me via email at amy@artsbuildontario.ca. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.